Hi, this is Shambhavi. Welcome to my weekly podcast about spirituality, love, death, devotion, and waking up while living in a messy world. The Satsang with Shambhavi podcast is recorded live each week with students of our nonprofit community, Jaya Kula. For more information and to find out about attending a satsang, visit jayakula.org. Thanks for listening. Much love to you, wherever and however you are. One of the things that I really dislike about being a not anymore new spiritual teacher is that I have had the experience over and over again, which I share with all you parents, I'm sure, of meeting children when they're young and having them love satsang, they love mantra, they love being around the community. And then they hit puberty and they're like eye-rolly and couldn't be bothered even saying hi. So now I see it coming. It's like I have the longer view of this phenomenon. And I just hope they'll get back to their, what I like to call it, our second innocence. We have a kind of natural, uninformed innocence when we're very young. But then if we're lucky and we have the right circumstances, then we get older and we come into a second innocence, which is actually much better than the first kind. Some people like to say, oh, children are so enlightened. That's really just a load of crap, as well as any parent knows. Yes, children are more open in a certain way, but that's not really what we're talking about. But there's this second innocence that can happen after we have more wisdom and we've been through some trauma and tragedy and losses, and we learn more about how things work, and then if we're lucky, realize that we don't have to defend ourselves against life. And then we can have a second innocence, which is much more enduring, and we're not able to get knocked off of that so easily. Children's innocence can be destroyed, but the innocence that comes from real wisdom cannot be destroyed.
I remember you saying that being a teenager, there's a quality that you really like. I don't want to say it's critical thinking, but kind of like that questioning.
Brash.
Yeah. What's the wisdom seed in that period?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. So there's sort of a second innocence that is a return to a better version of childhood. Mm-hmm. And then there's also maybe a second teenagerhood. That I never thought of that before. So I've often referred to my inner brat, and I'm not sure that inner brat has quite left its teenager years, but in any case, I've always loved teenagers in a certain way. A certain variety of teenager, when they get told no, they say, why not? And why not is maybe my tagline in life, I'm not sure. So this idea that we could have a second teenagerhood where the why not became more informed by wisdom. Of course, the reason why parents say no so often to teenagers is because teenagers don't often have enough sense of the larger world to make decisions where they wouldn't get harmed in some way. When I think of the things I did from the ages of 13 to about 16, it's a very strong argument for never having children. My parents were not really paying attention, though, so they didn't actually get to learn the horror of what I was doing. But I definitely put myself in some extremely dangerous situations. So that kind of why not of our actual literal teenage years is really informed by a feeling of invulnerability, which isn't real. And that's why the parents have to get into these battles with their teens to try to literally protect them from killing themselves. I don't think every teen is the way that I was. I wasn't a bad teen. I just basically would not take no for an answer ever, and just took a lot of risks, like with my physical self, which were not informed by a sense of impermanence. So that would be interesting that we could return to that feeling of possibility, of openness. What happens usually is that people might, if they're in a certain circumstance, during their teen years and maybe into their mid to late 20s, go through this period of time where they do feel like there's a lot of possibility and they do feel more rebellious which I always appreciate. And they are willing to ask the questions that maybe are a little uncomfortable and experiment with their lives more and rebel more. And then this convention starts to set in. It's like they get to have a self-concept that now they're adults. And so there's a battening down of the hatches. All of that experimentation goes away, and they decide to get a conventional job, and then they get married, whatever they do, and then they just lead a life like everybody else, which we know where that's gotten us. I once actually got into a lot of trouble when I was an undergraduate. I took a lot of science as an undergrad, and one of the science courses I took was in the astronomy department, and it's a field in astronomy or I'm not sure what the actual overarching field is, but it's called exobiology. And it's basically imagining, but also in a very practical way, thinking about what biological conditions would be necessary to give rise to life. What are the parameters on other planets, and what would we need to do to communicate with other beings and stuff like that. And we were having this very typical undergraduate conversation, and I was saying something about we're so afraid of the other here, what makes us think we could possibly communicate with aliens very well, actual aliens. And people were saying, well, that yes, our parents are like that, but we're not going to be like that. And I opened my big mouth and said, well, if I look back, successive generations of young people have felt that way, and yet the world just goes on the way it's always gone on. There's this constriction that happens at a certain point, a conservatization. So the way that we relate to aliens is not really going to be very different from how our parents might. And everyone just turned on me. It was like a pariah at that point. But it's really true. So if we're lucky, and this is much more rare, we might run into a circumstance or teachings that held the door open for us so that we could have a second experience of potentiality and adventure and experience the experimental nature of life, the improvisational nature of life. But I think that's really rare to encounter that. Maybe second innocence is rare too, I don't really know. But certainly with the discourses that we have going in this U.S. culture right now among a certain swath of people in our culture, these discourses about irreparable damage, that we have suffered irreparable damage to something very essential about the individual. That discourse is definitely working against the discovery of second innocence and this creative, infinite potential that we might feel have a heart in. I have told this story before. When I was in my 20s or so, I was with my father in a bar, and he knew that I was interested in outer space and stuff like that. So he said, when you're young, you think about infinity and alien planets and things like that, but then you grow up and that stuff just isn't important anymore. And I was thinking to myself, you have no idea who I am. Just no clue whatsoever. It was a very funny moment. Anyway, that was a great question. I never thought of that before.
I want to piggyback off the conversation of something that I'm struggling with, and it has to do with growing up, being a teenager, questioning everything, and not feeling trust in any sort of authority figure. And as I'm older now, on a spiritual path, that trickling into my relationship with you and the teacher and trusting the teacher. Mm-hmm. And that little boy in me that doesn't, and trying to break free from that.
Well, you brought this up before, and it was funny because everyone who's been around for a while knows how I feel about this issue of trust. And they were all holding their breath, waiting for me to do my little song and dance about trust. But since you bring it up again, I'm going to do my thing now, which is, number one, and I say this with a smile, but I mean it very seriously, I don't want your trust. I reject it. Trust comes with expectations. Trust is not really trust. Trust comes with, okay, you seem to be behaving in a way that I can trust. So maybe it's not articulated, but you have some list of things that are trustworthy, whether it's articulated or not. It could just be a feeling. But the minute I step outside of that, the trust is gone. And now all of a sudden, you're upset with me because I'm not behaving the way you expect me to and want me to. So you have your definition of trust, or your feeling of whatever triggers you to feel that you trust someone. That belongs to you. That doesn't belong to me. And the other aspect of it is that when you come to a teacher and say, I trust you, you're basically saying, I'm relinquishing self-responsibility. Now it's up to you to maintain this trust. No, I'm not going to. So what I want is confidence. I want you to have knowledge of how I am and how these teachings are. I don't want any leaps of faith, and I don't want to be beholden to your trust. In fact, I'm not. Somebody might try to rope me in with their trust, but it's not going to happen because there's something much, much better available to you. And that is actual confidence, inner knowing. You haven't met me in person yet, so I don't know if that's a deficit or not. I mean, this is like a very weird situation. I've never been in this situation with students where people are coming around for quite a long time and getting involved and being part of the community, and no one has ever met them in person and they've never met us. You've never seen me do whatever in my daily life. All you see is me sitting on this cushion playing the role of the teacher. And that in itself is a big red flag. Who knows what I might do if we're actually together? It could be something totally untrustworthy by your lights. So in any case, you do your practice. And then at some point, you have an incontrovertible knowing about things. It comes slowly. And then you don't need to trust me. And then it doesn't matter if I do some weird thing that doesn't meet your standard conventional expectation of how a teacher should be. I can tell you certain things about myself. And anyone in the community will tell you that too. I have never had sex with a student. I don't have any interest in having sex with students. It's not just like I've held myself back. I have no interest in it. I've never stolen any money from any student or Jaya Kula as an organization. And I told one lie in 17 years, and it was because someone was indulging in very traditional marriage fantasies, and I just started playing along with them like I was on an episode of Downton Abbey. And of course, that involved me telling a lie as part of that drama. And that was the one time I've ever lied. And even then, even though it was like a drama, that person got upset. I take marriage a little bit Jocko seriously, a little bit with a wink, because marriages are hugely conventional by design. That's where the wink comes from. In any case, that's an aside. That's really all I can tell you, and anybody else can tell you the same. But you can see on an ordinary level how Jaya Kula is run, what kind of community this is, and how people treat each other. And again, that's not going to be perfect either, believe me. The idea is that we're going to throw expectations out, but what you should have an expectation of is that the teacher will relate to you with compassion. Compassion in the bigger sense, not the small little confined, constrained sense that most people have of compassion. So it doesn't mean always being quiet and sweet in some conventional way. But you should feel the teacher's kindness and compassion. That's a bottom line. You should know it, not trust it, know it. You should know that the teacher is walking the walk, that they've done the practice, that they have some fruition. And you should feel that and know it beyond a shadow of a doubt. This is being self-responsible. It's up to you to discover that knowledge through your interactions with the community and the teacher. It's not up to me to prove anything to you. Even if I were a complete charlatan, I'm doing charlatan. It's up to you to figure that out. This is a very mature and self-responsible practice. I do my best, but I'm also human. I'm also not totally enlightened. I have karmas. You're just going to have to deal with all that if you want to stick around. Usually the cartoon-like figure of the teacher I trust doesn't involve actually being human or making mistakes or having karmas. It involves some idea of cartoon-like perfection that you feel you can rely on and be safe with. And this isn't a tradition about being safe. Obviously, not everyone's going to be in this kind of relationship with a teacher. There's a lot of people, everyone has a very unique relationship with me, and everyone is not in the same place. But if you go very deep with a teacher in one of these traditions, my job is basically to dismantle all of your self-concepts. And your job is to let me do it. That is just not a safe thing. But I will say that if ultimately all that just isn't for you, and I'm not saying it isn't, I'm just saying this to anybody, if ultimately this kind of tradition, which is somewhat rough and tumble and a little bit scary, but should not be cruel or mean or uncompassionate or unkind, that is off the table. That is off the table. A lot of teachers have used that idea of this is a rough and tumble tradition, and as one Rinpoche said, the guru is the person you've hired to assassinate your small sense of self. That doesn't sound safe. But some teachers have used that as a vehicle for abusing, manipulating, mistreating students. So we have to be very, very, very careful of that. Very careful. But even so, that's still up to you to discern. And if you decide, I don't really like this kind of tradition, man. I want to hear about trust and faith and belief, and that's the kind of stuff that moves me and makes my heart go pitter-patter. I'll help you. I'll help you find a new tradition. I think there's many, many different traditions for many different kinds of people in different conditions. And that's why they're there. So I'm not saying that everyone has to like what's going on here or feel that it's right for them. But I advise you to take your time. Try to grok that you are in a bit of a different universe here in terms of the view and the method and the relationship between you and the teacher. There's also people who aren't really prepared for this and they just come in pre-diminished. That isn't my responsibility. But if you're in the right place and you're in the right tradition with the right teacher, whatever they're doing should ring a bell in your heart.
It seems like the teachers that get quoted the most often are the frauds in popular culture because they do a really good job of projecting or pretending to be saints, whereas teachers that are being themselves might not be as exciting to the masses, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's a good observation. And that is because we have very deep longing. And our longing is often not informed by clarity. It's honest longing, and it's the longing that's eventually going to move us toward greater awakening. But we have some maybe less than savory pit stops along the way because we have imperfect clarity. And that teacher promises you things. They promise you whatever they promise you, and they're very magnetizing in some way. And you feel like you're going to get what you want, what you're longing for. And then you find out, no, that's not going to happen. Whereas I might say, well, probably none of us are going to wake up in this lifetime. I've said that many times, that we're going to have slow realization, and I don't expect any of us to become fully enlightened in this lifetime. If it happens, great, take my seat, please. But that's not exactly a headliner. So it really has to do with, we get fooled by these patently, obviously false claims. Because if they were right about telling all their followers, you can become this and that in this lifetime, which is one of the things that people usually get promised, just look around. All you need to do is look around and know that's not true. But why do we buy into that? Is because we have longing. So we shouldn't berate ourselves for that longing. That longing is our greatest treasure. But what's needed is clarity. What's needed is more clarity, sobriety, practicality. So I don't mind not having headlines. There's also a very strong tradition of the invisible teacher. I much more identify with that kind of thing. I'm not really exactly invisible. I have a lot of social media going on, so I really can't claim that. But in a sense, just keeping a lower profile and doing your thing, and that actually really greatly appeals to me. Satsang with Shambhavi is produced by Jaya Kula, a nonprofit community offering opportunities to learn and practice in the direct realization traditions of Trika Shaivism and Dzogchen. If you enjoyed listening, please help us keep this podcast and many other teachings open to all by making a monthly or one-time donation. Visit jayakula.org to make a donation and explore more of our offerings.